Are you dreading Father's Day? Maybe you're feeling both happy to celebrate the fathers in your life, but also grieving not being a father to your own children yet. Maybe you know someone who's struggling with infertility this Father's Day, your partner, a friend, a loved one, and you want to know how to support them. In this episode of the Baby or Bust Fertility Podcast, we'll dive deep into the complicated holiday of Father's Day for the fertility community with Dr. Erica Bove. Welcome to the Baby or Bust Fertility Podcast, the podcast with interviews and in-depth discussions on all things reproductive health. It's created to support anyone curious about infertility, miscarriage, and early pregnancy. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, a double board-certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist, and former fertility and IVF patient myself, helping build families for almost 20 years and dedicated to supporting and educating you on your family building journey. Father's Day is not a blissful celebration for all. We can both honor the fathers and father figures in our life and grieve not being fathers yet. We can have loved ones struggling with this holiday when we know that they want to be fathers, but they haven't built the family of their dreams yet. Today we have Dr. Erica Bove here to discuss this complicated holiday for the fertility community. Dr. Bove is both a double board-certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist practicing at the University of Vermont and has her own fertility coaching practice called Love and Science Fertility. She brings together a unique viewpoint from both a doctor's perspective on caring for the medical needs of patients, as well as a fertility coach's perspective on caring for the emotional needs of those with infertility. Here to share insights on Father's Day for the fertility community is Dr. Bove. Dr. Bove, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Shahine.
I'm so excited to connect with you. I mean, we've had doctors on the show, of course. You know, you are an OBGYN and a reproductive endocrinologist. And we've had fertility coaches and psychologists and, you know, the emotional support side of fertility practitioners on the show. But you are both, and that is so unique and so fascinating. And so can you please tell the listeners about your background and a little bit about what you do day to day?
Absolutely. So I went to med school to be a psychiatrist, but then I got to my rotations and I found OBGYN so exciting. And I thought to myself, I really think I might need to reconsider this because although I love psychiatry and the human spirit and what motivates us and all those things, like I like working with my hands. I love having these very, solvable problems, right? Problem solution, which I know it's not that clear, but the pace was a lot better for me. So just like you, I did medical school, OBGYN residency, REI fellowship. And then when I got into practice, and I started seeing patients, I realized like the bulk of what I'm delving with every single day, like my clinic panel every single day for the most part is bad news. It's like people who have not gotten pregnant with a certain method and they're coming to talk about next steps. It's people who have had an unsuccessful embryo transfer. And, what I found is in the space of a 30-minute appointment, there is just not the time to really go deep. You can do it on the surface. You can say, okay, this is what I think happened. These are your options. These are the tests I think we should do before doing something else. And obviously be very empathetic. But like all of the sort of deeper hurts, fears, anxieties, maybe partner differences, if that's applicable, like so much of that was unexplored. So I decided to become a certified coach during COVID, actually largely for personal reasons, because I love coaching myself and I've benefited a lot in my personal life. And once I got to coaching school, I was like, this is what my patients need. Like, I think that these tools would be really helpful to my patients. So I started experimenting and things were going very well. And it was usually like I would do the 30-minute appointment and I'd say, hey, I think we have more to talk about. Like, let's make another appointment to really talk about like maybe if egg donation is for you, egg donor IVF is for something, whatever it is, and like people are really responding so well to it. And so that's when I thought to myself, like, I think I actually want to do this and provide this service to the world and offer fertility coaching.
That's amazing. And so what was the training like? What does it mean to be a coach, and how is that different from like a mental health counselor or therapist?
I researched coaching schools significantly, and I found what I thought was the best one I could find, which is the Life Coach School. At the time, it was a 6-month program with tuition and night classes and oral exams, although nowhere near as bad as our oral exams for certification. But truly, I mean, like my sister was having her bachelorette in Cancun, and I said, "I'm so sorry, like I can't go out with you guys. I have an oral exam."
Oh my
It's like, it was kind of serious.
Dedication.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So there was a small group of us of 9 people and a coach in that group. We had homework we did every single week. We had a exam at the very end. So it was truly like a 6-month program. And I would say, I mean, not like medical school or anything, but it was fairly rigorous, especially like holding down a regular job and doing all the other things. But it was so fascinating. Like I think most of us who go into this work really are lifelong learners, and we're always kind of like pushing the edge. And I think that's a lot of your mission too, is really educating and, learning and sharing and empowering and all those things. And so all of that is within coaching. And it's just kind of how do we look at it? How do we use the coaching tools to help people? And I say all the time, like we are accessing this at the fertility journey part. That's where we're accessing this. But this affects every single aspect of your life. This affects your relationships. This affects your concept of yourself. Sometimes childhood comes up. And so coaching, to your question about like, how is this different from other kinds of mental health support? Coaching is basically very action oriented. It's looking at the question of like, how am I showing up today in this body, in this energy? What are my thoughts? What are my feelings? And is this how I want to show up?
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of us have like this low level irritability or this sort of just malaise, but we don't really know what's going on. And because we know that 95% of what we do every day is dictated by our subconscious. So what coaching does is it shines a light on those thoughts and those feelings that affect how we are going about our days. And then we get to choose. We say, is that how I want to think about this? Is that how I want to feel about this? And then we can then decide, even if it's a 1% shift, like I'm actually going to try on this different thought. I'm going to see if that makes me feel the way I actually want to feel. And then from that, our actions spring, from our feelings. And then that then guides how we show up in the world. So that's like a very like coaching 101, what it is.
Okay.
Like I said, it's like very present focused. It's very action oriented. Whereas I think, and I am like a therapy junkie. I adore therapy. So this is not to knock therapy at all. I think therapy often like, there's so many different therapeutic modalities and you need like a license to do therapy and all those things. But like therapy often goes into the past and the childhood, and there's psychotherapy and there's EMDR and there's all these different beautiful modalities. I'd say coaching does not do all of those things. Sometimes trauma comes up. We can do some trauma work, but if that really happens, I'm like, okay, let's get you plugged into somebody who can really do this kind of deep work in this way. So I think that they are complementary. I think there's a lot of overlap. And I think the best outcomes happen when we have one of each.
Oh, I think that's beautiful. And then just logistically, how are you both a reproductive endocrinologist, like a doctor, a fertility doctor, and a life coach at the same time, and have a family and be a human? Like how are you actually managing that logistically?
So I actually work part-time in my clinical job. And so I work every other week at the University of Vermont doing all the doctor things, the IVF, the embryo transfers, and all of that. And then the rest of the time, I run my coaching practice. And so for anybody who's interested, my coaching practice is called Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. And my website, I tried to keep it consistent, loveandsciencefertility.com. And it's wonderful. So I get to coach, I get to be a doctor. And I will say to your question about how this all works, I sleep 8 hours a night. I make sure I eat good food.
Very important.
And I truly think that, those things, like I balance a lot, and I can only do that because my basic needs are met.
Oh, that is fantastic. Absolutely. Well, this can be a really challenging time of year for a lot of fertility patients. Father's Day is coming up. This episode is coming out the week before the actual Father's Day weekend celebration. And, how are your clients feeling right now? How are your patients feeling right now about Father's Day?
I think everyone is feeling pretty terrible, honestly. And, we
Mm,
just came off the heels of Mother's Day. Now we have Father's Day. And I think a lot of the times we think about holidays can be very triggering, but we think of like the more traditional holidays like Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving,
mhm.
maybe anniversaries. But it's a lot of the softer holidays. It's Mother's Day, it's Father's Day, it's Halloween, it's the first day back to school when everybody is just faced everywhere on social media about what has not yet manifested for them. And so I think people are anxious, they are, feeling inadequate. And I do a lot of talking about feelings around this time of year because it's just so darn hard.
It really is. And I feel like so much of fertility, treatment, testing is so female focused. If you've got the ovaries, you've got the uterus, you're just doing more of the shots and the procedures. And I feel like so much of the time, the people with sperm who are 50% of this equation and fully a part of the whole process really can feel left out. How do you see this whole fertility journey impacting men in a different way than it impacts women?
Yeah. I can speak in terms of stereotypes. I know not every couple fits this mold, but I think a lot of the time the men truly feel helpless. And, I was even talking to somebody recently who said her husband has been so closed off, so closed off, so closed off. And she's been like the driver, like, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to have sex now, like all the things. And she just came home. He didn't know she was coming home and he was just like weeping. She found him crying
Mm,
because he had no other way to tell her that he was really struggling. And
mhm,
so fortunately, that opened up a portal between them where they could really connect. But I think, first of all, I don't think men are really taught that it's okay to have feelings.
mhm,
And I think that as men then go through these experiences that are very challenging emotionally, sometimes they don't have the language to express what it's like for them.
mhm,
And I think that's combined with them watching their wives, if that's the case, if that's the type of couple we're working with, like they're watching their wives give themselves injections, go through these treatments and all of those things. And it's just, they just don't know how they can help and how they can be supportive. And they just really want their wives to feel better. And I mean, I think there's
mhm,
probably other like maybe deeper evolutionary things. Like I was thinking about how women have a biological clock that is like kind of more shorter. And so that probably plays a role at some level, right? Because like the women really feel
mhm,
like, okay, it's go time. Like I don't have forever. I think that like you said, the women have the parts in terms of like gestating and giving birth and all those things. And so just naturally, there's not as much of an active role in those things. And so I
mhm,
think women just inherently know that their bodies will be doing the bulk of the work. But I think that, what I say to men is I say, just because you're not doing these treatments doesn't mean that you're not like 50-50 in here. Like, so what that means is I want you to step it up at home. I want you to, do the massages. I want you to take on some of the house chores that you might not traditionally do,
mhm.
because that level of support is really going to help your wife feel super supported. And that's really needed. She's going to be depleted right now.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I often see more anger from men than women. I don't know if you see that too. And of course, everyone's different, but I definitely see a pretty common pattern. There's such a lack of control in fertility. Like, why is this happening? Why me? Aren't we just supposed to be able to procreate? Like, that's the natural state of things. Like, what is wrong with me? And I feel like men in general take on a little bit of this like problem solving. Like, okay, if you just tell me what I have to do and we just do it, it's going to be done and we can stop hurting and we can move on with our lives. And that kind of can turn into more of an anger and a almost like protective too of the other partner. I don't know. Do you see that in any of
I've
your
seen that a lot.
clients that you're coaching?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like a lot of the time especially after an unsuccessful cycle, I spend a lot of time talking with the husband about, just sort of, they're like, well, what happened? Why didn't this work? And what is the plan? And,
Yeah.
but the interesting thing I've learned through my coaching training is that anger is never driving the bus,
Mm,
right? Anger is like this big, powerful emotion. When we're angry, we feel like we have power because it's a very strong emotion. Although behind the anger, it's usually softer emotions like helplessness, like fear, like vulnerability. And so, when I think about that, I actually like look at a bus, like actually imagine a bus. And I'm like, who's at the wheel here? And it might seem like it's anger, but we always have to look back and say, okay, like what else is behind that anger? And in my experience, like we can't get through that until those softer emotions are addressed. Maybe not by name, because again, that's not always how men work, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say like, oh, it seems like you're feeling helpless right now. But I would say like, what can we do to give you back your power? What can we
Yeah.
do to put you back in the driver's seat? Because I think part of this is people feel like they have no agency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for men, that's especially important. And so, how can we give people back their agency of what they can control
Yeah.
to get people moving on in a way
Mm-hmm.
that's ultimately going to lead them to be successful?
Yeah. I really like that analogy of anger is not driving the bus. Like what emotion is showing up, and like why is anger coming forward? What's really behind it? Like what's sitting in the passenger seat? I like that I can actually remember that. And because sometimes, as the doctor, as the person who's receiving that anger, I have to remind myself like, hey, these people are just really sad. They just really want a baby,
Yes.
and it's coming from frustration. I also find I practice in Seattle, Washington, with a lot of software companies, a lot of
Yes.
high tech, a lot of people that are very data driven, results oriented. And I have to kind of remind them that we are not dealing with a spreadsheet. We are not dealing with a computer program. We're dealing with the human body, and that there are sometimes not going to be answers. And I apologize for that. I'm like, listen, on behalf of the entire fertility community, like, I am sorry that I don't have an answer as to why you had that miscarriage or that embryo transfer didn't work. But that does not mean that you're not going to be parents, and try to like pull out of I must know exactly why this particular, outcome happened. I don't know. I'm sure that you do that as a doctor. I'm curious if you do that as a coach as well. How do you take off your doctor hat and put on your coach hat, and then take off your coach hat and put on your I mean, I think it's amazing that I'm talking
Yeah.
to a person that does
Oh,
both.
thank you. I mean, I think about like what's most needed right now, right? Because if you think about it, like sometimes when we're doing a consultation in the office as a doctor, what's really needed is that talking to help people move beyond their limiting beliefs or whatever it is. But sometimes we need more clinical, right? I never take off either hat fully. It's just what's my focus in this particular encounter,
Mm,
which is going to help people the most.
that's
And then when
great.
I'm a coach, I mean, technically it's not medical advice, but I say like I'm not going to just like shirk off all these years of training and say like, I'm just a coach without all this background. And so I just say to people in this context, this is my perspective, not medical advice, but it's always both. It's just what we're focusing on.
You mentioned this with your first example about that wife walking home and, her husband being surprised, not expecting her. And that was his one time to be alone and cry and have some emotions. I see a lot of men just deny emotions, be like, focus on my female partner, the person who has the ovaries, who has the uterus that, just had the miscarriage, don't worry about me. I've got to be strong. Don't worry about my emotions. I'm just going to worry. And then it just builds up and builds up. How do you help your clients, not let that happen and just allow themselves to
Yeah.
feel?
That's one thing I love about our work in general, whether I'm in my clinic or doing the coaching, is like that we often do work with couples. And I mean, I'm sure you're like me in that when we walk into the room, we can see the body language and we can really feel what's going on. Sometimes people truly have their chairs like pointing away from each other, right? Looking in opposite directions.
Mm,
And sometimes people are like sitting side by side, they're holding hands. If the wife starts to cry, the husband offers her a Kleenex. Like there's all these subtle things that sort of help me understand the baseline health of this relationship, right? And I think what happens is as fertility treatments are not working, right? Because if they work, they graduate and then everybody's happy. But if they're not working,
mm,
that starts to drive a wedge in the relationship. And what I help my patients and my clients with is like, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to your initial vision of your dream family before all this infertility stuff happened. And like, let's talk about why you wanted to have children. Why did you want to have a family? Because usually, unless people have never talked about it, like people are on the same page initially. And then as things get hard, that's when their coping mechanisms come into place, their old patterns, their feelings of not wanting to be vulnerable and show fear. And then they kind of harden even to each other, even to themselves, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think kind of zooming out and saying, okay, like what is your why as a couple? Like, let's go back to, maybe it's their wedding day or their honeymoon or all of that like initial energy of excitement. And that often helps people to kind of not get so caught up in the minutia of the present, but really realize the vision and start to kind of communicate. I help people communicate all the time, whether it's coaching or doctoring, to just sort of say, like, how are you feeling about this right now? Is there anything else you want to share? Sometimes I give people homework and then I have them come back to me, because this is not like a question and answer session. It's like we need to process this. We need to talk about our values. We need to talk about our identity. We need to talk about our financial resources. I love that podcast you had about the financial aspects of all this too. I mean, it affects every single aspect of life, right? Like sexual health, all of the things. And so I think when we can take a more holistic view and help people get back on the same page and see each other, that's when the movement starts to happen.
Do you have couples come to see you in your coaching practice, or is it usually one or the other? Do you encourage them to come together? Any thoughts on that?
Typically, it's one-on-one, and then we do the group calls as well. I always offer the couples to be able to be present at the same time if they want to. A lot of times when I'm meeting with people and trying to figure out if it's a good fit, the couple will come on. I think maybe because it's a financial decision that people kind of want to see, what it is, what it's all about. But I always say, I welcome it. If you would, whatever serves you. That's the nice thing about coaching. I mean, I think medicine is a little bit more streamlined in a sense, and there's like, you really need to get through a certain amount of things in a certain amount of time. But I think coaching is a little bit more malleable in terms of like, time is on my side. Like, I have all the time we need. And so that's a luxury really, because in other aspects I don't have that. And so I try to use that to my advantage and say, like, what's going to serve this person? What's going to serve this couple? And how can we leverage that to help them in the best way possible?
That's great.
But yeah, so far nobody's taken me up on it, but it's always available.
We're going to get back to this discussion in just a second, but I wanted to pause and remind you just how important it is to follow the show, rate the show, and especially review the show. It really helps people find us. Here is one that I pulled from Apple Podcast reviews just recently. The title is Love It. This is one of the best podcasts I have listened to. Wow, thank you. So informative and so true to life. Love Dr. Shahine. Thank you for giving back to the communities to educate us. We need more people in the world like you. Well, that is a wonderful review. I appreciate those kind words. So please, wherever you're listening to the podcast, take a second right now to follow the show, rate the show, and review it. Now let's get back to talking to Dr. Bove. We're talking a lot about men and how they deal with fertility, and it might be different from just, and everyone's unique, but different from women, just sort of in general. And I can definitely, and I know you've seen this, just how hard on a relationship infertility can be. And I've seen people split up from it. I've seen, divorces, honestly. And how do you help coach people through that relationship strain? Because I feel like one of the things is, if you're really going through infertility, your partner is the one person on the planet that really knows what's going on. You can kind of share a little bit with parents, share a little bit with your best friend, or, it's your fertility doctor maybe, and your partner that like really know what's going on. And that creates inherently a lot of tension, because sometimes if that's the only person that you're sharing things with, then you're going to share all the feelings, the anger, the frustration. And so how do you help your clients communicate and save their relationship?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is this is not a blame game. It's not like this is your fault, this is my fault, because I think once we start that blame, like that's when people start to shut down. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to keep people engaged with each other and not shut down in their own little silos,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing is like, even if it's like, say, quote unquote, male factor infertility, or even if somebody has a habit that you're like, oh my gosh, if they didn't do X, Y, Z, we wouldn't be in this boat. Like, try to put that aside and have compassion for each other,
Mm-hmm.
and to say like, we're a team, we're going to figure this out together, and leave the blame and the judgment at the door. That's my first piece of advice. I think the second thing I would say is like, we need language to express what we're feeling and what we need. So I was a relationship head coach for a year before I launched my own practice. And one thing we did a lot in that space was like, we'd like have a sentence structure, right? Like, I am feeling X, which is, I think maybe comes a little more naturally for women than men. That's a generalization, but still, but like, I am feeling scared. And then you say, I need Y. Like, I need a hug. Like, truly, it is so hard to
Hmm.
ask for a hug sometimes. Like, and it's like I don't know why people just don't want to seem like needy or whatever, but like, this is, I'm feeling X, and we can't say I'm feeling like I'm feeling like you just don't care. Like, that's a cop out. We never say I'm feeling like. You say
Hmm.
I'm feeling. It has to be a feeling word. I am feeling
Hmm.
X. I need Y. Can you please do Z for me? Right? And
I like
the
that.
kicker is that, yeah, that person, though, we have to be fully prepared if we're the asker, that that person might not be able to give us what we're asking for. But that's why we always fill our own well first. Like, we come to the table with our well at least 50% full, because then when we ask, it's not out of this desperate place. That's just such a
Hmm.
beautiful thing to take away. And I also think that the energy we bring to the relationship is really important. I'm divorced. I've done a ton of marriage therapy. And like I said, I'm a therapy junkie. I love it. So I bring this wisdom to my coaching experience as well. And what I'm learning and what I've learned in the past is that like curiosity is really the way through. And so like, if I can say to my partner, say I'm undergoing the fertility journey, and I can say like, what is it like to be you right now? And
Hmm.
just shut up. Like,
Mm-hmm.
truly ask that question, and ask in an open-ended way. Like, I want to understand what it's like when you get up in the morning. Like, what do you think? What do you feel? What are you worried about? Like, what's it like to be in a relationship with me right now? Where I'm like, dot, 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 like sex right now. Like, like, all
Yeah.
those things that like that, there's this neuroticism, I think, that comes with staying on top of everything, which that's not the most sort of fun and playful energy that maybe existed in the first place. And so, really leading with curiosity and just knowing that like no feeling is going to kill us,
Mm-hmm.
that the whole point is to engage with our partner in a way that they feel seen and that they feel supported as well. And
Mm-hmm.
then, when that person feels heard, maybe they'll ask, like, hey, what's it like to be you right now? And that's where the magic happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's when we actually share. Brene Brown says our vulnerability is our strength. And, that's the most beautiful thing, is to help people see each other, reconnect with each other, forgive themselves. And then that's when the fertility journey can really move forward, right? That's when it makes them stronger instead of separating and getting a divorce, as I mean, I've seen a zillion times as well. So that's the goal, is to really help people figure out why they did this in the first place and what's it like for the other person, and then to reconnect in a way that helps each other give the other person what they need, right?
Yeah. That's really great. Yeah, taking the time to reflect, get out of the minutia. You talked about, remember why they started on this journey in the first place. Forget blame, forget shame, and really look at yourself to ask, what do you need right now, and to be able to communicate that with the other person. That's beautiful. Erica, what if two people want different things? What if one partner wants to stop fertility treatment and the other partner wants to keep going? How do you, I know you can't make decisions for other people, but as a coach, how do
No,
you
I
help people
I think
reconcile?
about this all the time. That's when we zoom out, because if you imagine, like, I mean, I'm a very visual person. So, like, say one person is over on this island and one person's over on this island. Like, if you draw two lines, there's going to be a triangle where there's a meeting point, right? So, instead of it being like, this is me and this is you, like people would not have married each other if they had nothing in common, if they didn't have some sort of shared vision, if they, and maybe it's finances. I think that's a lot of it is like, we don't have the financial wherewithal to keep doing this. And that's, I mean, stereotypically, usually the man, if it's a heteronormative relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then the woman's like, but I really want to do this. And I really think this next cycle is going to work. And so that's when we really have to then delve into those fears
Mm-hmm.
and those feelings and like tapping into thinking outside the box. We know that when we are stuck in fear, when we're, we have anxiety, we have anger, we have shame, like our frontal lobes just shut down
Mm-hmm.
and it stops all creative thinking. And so a lot of this is, and I do a lot of this, like I inject mindful self-compassion into everything I do. And there's actually evidence that when we can do that, like our frontal lobes come back online and we actually start to solve our own problems because we're not so limited by our fear centers. And I know this is very abstract. Like what it truly looks like is very practical, but really like helping saying it makes sense that you're both on different pages here. It makes sense that this is a very complicated process and you both want different things right now. Validating. Okay, so then, what are your top 3 priorities? And maybe it's like, I think a family should look like this and you think a family should look like this. And, all those sorts of things. It's bridging and finding the commonalities because I think so much of the time we're like, this is I need to be right. This is my argument and I'm right because, and there's that expression, like, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? Like sometimes in order to be like happy, we have to let go of that ego. And I don't want to say give up certain things, but just sort of come to the middle a little bit and say like, and this is boundary work, like what is my core need here? And what am I willing to let go of to meet that core need? And a lot of the times, 2 people can have their core needs met when you can let go of the other stuff that's outside of that circle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. You can easily get caught up in a lot of the things that aren't the core needs, and that can make it not seem like a straight line to getting to that final decision. I like that, kind of zooming out a little bit, really thinking about what's important, taking that time to process and not just getting stuck in one decision and stuck in
Yes.
that argument.
And we do this a lot too, is we like use values as the filters for our decisions. So like, again, usually people who find each other have somewhat similar values. And so we do a whole exercise where we like list the values. And then we say, okay, what are your top 5 values? And then out of those, how can you say, okay, this is the question. And then I love this. Like, what would love do? What would trust do? What would peacefulness do? And so you take the values that you want to embody and then you ask that question. You say, what would that value do? And then it's very interesting because you might get a very different answer than what your ego would tell you. But because you're asking who you want to become, who you want to be as a couple, sometimes the output is different. And it actually makes sense because those are values-based decisions.
Amazing. Well, I just love learning from you, and just the way that you think about things and kind of in these really tough situations is really, really helpful. And I'm sure that you help a lot of people with some really tough decisions. So for our listeners that know that they have a loved one with infertility who's going to be suffering this weekend on Father's Day, do you have any tips for how they can support that loved one?
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is to be really sensitive. Maybe you're a father already, you're a parent. That can be really painful for somebody who is suffering. And so just understand that this is a really tender time for that loved one and just be mindful. Like if you have a pregnancy announcement, for instance, like please don't do it this weekend, right? The second thing I would say is to check in ahead of time and ask them how they want to handle the weekend. Obviously, it depends on the particular relationship, but some people want to talk about it. Other people prefer silence. And so you can inadvertently choose the wrong thing unless you've asked ahead of time. So just a text like, hey, I know this is coming up. It could be hard. Like, I'm going to see you at a barbecue. Like, do you want me to talk about it or not? What would be better for you?
Oh my gosh.
And then that puts them in the driver's seat.
I never thought of that. And that is such a good tip. It is so respectful. It's forward thinking. I mean, if I received a text like that, I would say, oh my gosh, this person really cares about me.
Totally.
That is beautiful, Erica. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. The third thing I would say is, this is obviously an important person to you. And so acknowledge them on that day with some sort of gratitude. Like, for instance, if it's like, your brother and he's the uncle to your children, like I would just say like, thank you so much for being like the world's best uncle. I'm so grateful you're in our lives. And Father's Day isn't just about biology. Like, you have this beautiful fathering energy, and our lives are so much better because of you. So I think sometimes people can feel left out, if they're not a quote unquote father yet. But I think just show your appreciation in a way that honors who they are to you and to the world. And I think that kind of helps with that core wound.
Oh, that is beautiful. How about some tips for listeners that are the people that are going to be suffering this weekend? So they are
Yes.
not fathers yet, or maybe they are a father, but they're suffering with secondary infertility, and that can be a really difficult place to be. For the people that are going to be struggling this weekend, do you have any tips for them?
Absolutely. I talk about this all the time, so I have 5. So let's go. Number 1. Number 1 is to think about triggers and to try to prevent them as much as possible, and then to manage them in the moment. I actually have a podcast about Mother's Day, so if people want to reference that too, I kind of go into more detail about this. But really, staying off social media is one of the best preventative measures, because it's just a filter. It's the top 5% of things that people want to post. And so just either contain it to a very minimum amount of time, or just stop it altogether, because it will make you feel worse, not better. My second suggestion is to honor your feelings and all of them, because I think that sometimes we think that we can't hold two contradictory emotions at the same time, but we absolutely can. We can feel maybe our father's alive and we're grateful for them, and we're also grieving the fact that we're not yet a father. Like, all those can coexist at the same time, and just to say, yeah, this is where I am in life, and to honor that. The third thing is to really think about who your village is. Maybe you have a friend who's undergoing infertility, who has and understands it. And so I always say, like, okay, preventatively, when the times get tough, this is who I'm going to text. And I just have my plan, because
Mhm.
that just, again, puts me in the driver's seat, so that I can feel like I know who my people are and I've got a plan for if things go south.
I love it.
And then number 4, I would say give yourself permission to set boundaries. So maybe your sister just had a kid and there's a newborn at a party, and it's just really hard for you and your wife to be around that little one as much as you love them. It just is very triggering. Just say, you know what, we're going to be there for an hour and then we got to go. Whatever your boundary is, like, it's okay to have boundaries. Boundaries actually enhance relationships. They don't take away from relationships if they're done in a loving and flexible way. So just give yourself permission to do what you need to do. And then my 5th is to ask yourself, how do I want to feel? And that's really the bulk of coaching. I think that we can say, I'm anticipating feeling grief. I'm anticipating feeling this. Like, maybe it's you want to feel peaceful. Maybe you want to feel grounded. Maybe you want to feel grateful for the things that you do have, on that day. It doesn't mean you have to choose one thing, but just set an intention. It's like when I start my yoga practice, I set an intention. Today, I want to feel, grounded. Today, I want to feel peaceful. And it's amazing how when we set that intention, our feelings do tend to follow that path, and our actions as well. And so just think about how you want that to be. And then bonus number 6 is to really trust the process. Like, you've talked about this, Dr. Shahine, before on your podcast, about how sometimes it's not the first time, it's not the second time, it's not the third time, but being persistent with the process, having a good relationship with your REI, all those things are key ingredients to the success. And so just saying, like, I know I might not be where I'm at right now, but there is a path, there is a plan. I'm going to stick with it. And, I'm going to trust the process. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I've really enjoyed this discussion, Erica, and I know the listeners are going to take away a lot of good information. I'm fascinated with the process of coaching. I think we're pretty familiar with therapy, just kind of going through our medical training or just being in therapy, myself. But coaching is different, and it seems more action forward. And I like the idea of setting intentions and really kind of structured working on feelings and relationships. I'm very interested in it. And I really appreciate your sharing kind of that process today. I know that if patients want to see you as a medical doctor, they can find you at the University of Vermont. But how can they find you as a coach?
Yes. So my website is the most comprehensive place. It's loveandsciencefertility.com. I'm also on social media under the same names, Love and Science Fertility. And I have a podcast myself now too. And so that's under the same name as well. But you are so thoughtful, Dr. Shahine, and you bring such a wealth of information and empowerment to the fertility community. And I'm just so grateful. I trust we're going to have more conversations on and offline, because I think we have a lot of alignment. And I'm excited to learn from you, and I'm excited to share more about the coaching world and how it can enhance all of our lives, really.
Well, thank you, Erica. I really appreciate your being here today. Thank you again.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this discussion all about Father's Day with Dr. Bove. I really appreciate her insights into this complicated holiday where you can feel a lot of emotions: anger, frustration, joy, happiness, everything tied up into one. And I really appreciate her tips and points on how to care for loved ones that you know are struggling with this holiday with infertility. And if you are that person, some tips for yourself to really take care of you. Find this episode and all others at my website, drlorashahine.com. You can find more educational content, and this podcast is also on my YouTube channel. Look for me on Instagram and TikTok. I just love educating, so find those resources. Share your own fertility story and topics you'd like to learn about, maybe people you'd like us to interview. Send us an email at hello@drlorashahine.com. Thank you to our friends at Seattle Sperm Bank and Braze Runs Production for sponsoring the show. Thank you to my producer, Shannon Perry, and her wonderful team at Audiotocracy. This is your host, Dr. Lora Shahine. See you next week. And until then, wishing you love, luck, and pineapples.